Hey, welcome to the Chill Cook. This is a basics episode. Here we focus on fundamental kitchen tips, tricks, recipes, things to help you feel a little bit more chill in the kitchen in just a couple minutes. Today we're focusing on something that I think is pretty valuable and useful if you want to be chill in the kitchen. We are diving into a different area of things here. We're heading into baking, and we're talking about pie crust today. This is actually something that you can do pretty easily, not a lot of ingredients, and you do not need to buy that pre-made dough from the store with lots of ingredients you probably can't read. So, what I've got in this bowl already is 2 cups of all-purpose flour and then a half cup of whole wheat pastry flour. I add in that half cup of whole wheat flour because it actually makes the flavor a little bit more interesting, a little bit nuttier, and texturally I think it makes the dough even better as well. It makes it a little bit more crumbly and a little bit more like a shortbread. You can definitely make this with the full 2.5 cups as all-purpose flour though. That's up to you. I also have a tablespoon of salt in here. I'm going to be using this dough recipe for something savory, actually for a pot pie. So I am not putting any sugar in here. If you are going to use this for like a traditional dessert, like a fruit pie, where you want it to be sweet, I would dial down the salt to about a half tablespoon and then put in a tablespoon of sugar. I've got that flour and salt in here already. Next I'm going to add my butter. This is 2 sticks of cold butter cut into cubes. Basically, it's kind of important to remember that your butter should be cold here. And this is kind of a nice thing because I'm often deciding that I want to cook or bake something and realizing that I should have gotten out the butter like an hour before so it could soften, and I end up sticking it in like the microwave or something to try and rush. And this is perfect cold. You don't even want it to be warm. So that's a win. And so you could do this in something like a food processor. But for me, I like to get in there and do it the old-fashioned way. This guy is a pastry cutter, and basically it's got a bunch of not sharp, but kind of blade type things on the bottom here that help cut that butter. The goal here is to get the butter into tiny bits interspersed throughout this floury dough, but so that it's not melted. It's still itself. It's still solid butter in those bits. This is definitely faster if you don't do it by hand, but I kind of like doing it the old-fashioned way. Getting in here, getting your hands dirty a little bit. This definitely has the potential to become a little bit messy. Don't worry about that. And a trick to this is really trying to keep that butter cold. So you're not going to try and have it in your hands for very long or to warm up too much to actually melt that. You want the butter to stay in whole pieces. Don't fret if you don't have one of these pastry cutters. They're pretty cheap to get. They're available at most places that sell kitchen supplies. And like I said, you could get your food processor out and go for it with that as well. Okay, so I've been working at this for a couple minutes, and you know you're getting there whenever you start to get sort of a crumbly, sandy texture. That's perfect. And so then your next step is to start adding tablespoons of ice water. I actually have ice floating in here. You definitely want this all to stay cold. Like I said, the butter staying cold is kind of the imperative thing to be focusing on here. So I'm going to start with about 3 tablespoons. And then work it in with the pastry cutter. The goal here is to get it to just start to come together into a dough that you can shape. You do not need to get it too wet. You just want it to start to come together. And once I start to get to the point where it's starting to become a little bit doughy, I'll actually switch out from my pastry cutter and use my fingers. Just add water as you think it's needed until you see it start to come together into a dough. You want to work pretty fast once you go in with your hands because obviously they're warm and can start to melt that butter, which you don't want. And honestly, the amount of water you'll need will vary. It can vary just day to day depending on what the weather's like, and it can also vary depending on what kind of flour you're using in here. So this is starting to pack together. And so next it's ready for me to turn it out onto my board here and shape it. You don't want to overwork it at all. That'll melt the butter. You want this to be a pretty short dough. So short dough is really exemplified in shortbread. If you're used to a shortbread cookie, that's a short dough. It's pretty flaky and crumbly. And you can see here, I'm not really going to work it too much at this point now that it's coming together. I'm just going to flatten it out a little bit, press it down with my palm, and then maybe get it into 2 chunks. And these 2 chunks are going to end up being our top and bottom crust. So try to make them fairly even. You'll notice these are still pretty crumbly. That's good. It's not overworked. And now, a step that you can't skip. Now you've got to let these rest. I can tell you that I've learned the hard way that you cannot skip the resting step, period. Basically, this lets the dough kind of relax from all that moving and compressing and mixing that we've just done. If you don't let it rest, you're never going to get it rolled out. It's going to shrink up and be like real hard once you bake it. It's going to be a complete waste of your time if you don't do this. Minimum of about 30 minutes. If you're in a real crunch, you could do 15 minutes, but honestly I'd say at least 30. Also at this step, you can keep these overnight. So this resting happens in the fridge. And that took all about 5 or 10 minutes. You got dough ready in the fridge, a little bit of a cleanup to do here, and see you in about a half hour. All right, so the dough has been resting for a while, and now it is ready for us to work with it. I'm just going to grab one here just to show you guys kind of the way to roll with this. Unwrap it. And because it's rested now, it's going to be a little bit more relaxed. It's going to stretch out more easily for us. And I've got just my regular countertop cleaned and sanitized, and also then dusted with some flour. Get your rolling pin. Also another nice tool I'd like to show you, the bench scraper. This is just kind of a little metal scraper device. It's sharp enough to cut through things, not sharp enough to hurt you though, and it helps really easily get things up off of the surface when you're working with dough. So I like to just go in and kind of make some indentations. This is a pretty dry dough, so you'll see a few cracks, and just like that you're pressing down into it. If it sticks at all, get your bench scraper up underneath to help turn it. It's okay that it's kind of crumbly. It's going to make a really nice dough that's also going to be kind of crumbly, which is something nice when it comes to your pie. If it's starting to stick, you'll just need to get a little bit more flour. And if it's breaking up at all, take any kind of extra outer piece and use it to patch that little spot and re-seal up a hole that might happen. Dough is not super easy, and you just gotta roll with the punches. That's part of being chill in the kitchen, is dealing with some of those little issues. And then what you're gonna do to pick this up and transport it to maybe your baking pan, your pie dish kind of deal, is get up underneath it. If you don't have a bench scraper, you could also use a knife. Also, because this is on a stone countertop, it's warming up pretty quickly. If it warms up too much, that butter gets too soft, and then that's also part of what makes it start to stick. So I like to fold it onto itself like that. And now you've got it in this fold. Easy to transport without ripping it, and then you would place it right in your pan and unfold it into that pan. So being able to make a pie crust like this is kind of a nice skill in the kitchen. There's tons of ways to use it. Savory things, pot pies, which is what I probably will use this for, fruit pies, lots of dessert items. And so when you see how easy it is, and that after you do it a couple times you get really comfortable with it, it's really worth learning. And I really like to do this all butter pie dough because that way you can avoid some of those vegetable shortenings that have like a 400-year shelf life. Those are probably not super good for you, and all natural butter is pretty straightforward. So that's how I like to choose. So keep an eye here on the Chill Cook for additional recipes to show you some amazing things to do with this pie crust. And as always, thanks for watching. Check us out at thechillcook.com for the full recipe and for lots of other videos.